Okay. Hey guys, welcome to seems like our weekly Thursday night soiree with the New York Giants Preservation Society. Um, just to go over a few things with you, I seem to have solved my Zoom issues with the emails. It's just that I cannot email the whole group multi-emails during the day, so it's basically one a day for everybody. And that's why I was able to get out all of these Zoom meeting sessions for Stu today. So generally speaking, if you ever see another email from Giants Guru at Verizon.net, that is also me if I have to send something, very, very important. Couple of things. I sent out a letter to John Shea and Bruce Jenkins today regarding that Giants wall. I did some research. All the New York Giants who are in the Hall of Fame and some other luminaries of the franchise who they might consider. And I basically said, they seemed interested. And if they want to write an article in the near future, there's no pressure, but most of us would be 100% behind them as far as wanting that to happen. Today we have Stu Thornley. Next Thursday is John Rosengren. Wrote a great book on the fight of their lives between Juan Marichal and John Roseborough. And then we have George Greger, who wrote a great verse for every year of the Giants' existence with most of the starting lineup and some of the key figures. Following that, we have our Thanksgiving break. So there'll be no meeting that week. I've got some commitments to December and January, and we will go from there. Tonight we have Stu Thornley. Stu is famous for many, many books. He's done many things in his life. But the two books we're talking are The Polo Grounds, his essays about the famed stadium, and also his earlier book, The Land of the Giants. Stu was our last actual speaker before COVID started. Infinities. He happened to be in New York at that time, and we were lucky enough to grab him. And then I told him we were doing these Zooms, and he's been on most of them anyway as an observer, but most of the people here did not get a chance to hear Stu talk when he was in Manhattan, and that's the beauty of this. So we have all different people, and looking forward to that. One other thing, Greg Prince, are you here? Greg? I don't know if Greg is here.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Greg, I heard you on WFAN the other night. You were awesome. I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh, thank you.
No problem, man. Greg is the ultimate New York Met blogger. Does a great job. So with that being said, Stu, welcome to our Zoom sessions. Great to have you back. Stu Thornley.
Welcome. Thank you.
I was great being at Infinities last year, and I think Gary and Bruce I saw is on here. Might have been the only two who were there, but this is nice to be able to get this out to different people all over the country. And I hope to get back to New York soon. We get there once a year for official scores meetings, and I know that next year they're not even going to have the meetings, so it's good that we can do these. I've been tuning in on some of the others and having good time watching those, and I plan to keep on doing it. I did the first book on the Polo Grounds, where I've never been to, and I'll talk about that, but I've always been fascinated by it, and that was just a straight book in the late 90s, and then McFarland Publishers is doing a series of books, historic ballparks, and they asked me about it. And Dan Van DiMortel, am I saying your name right, Dan? I don't think we've ever met in person. We always wave at each other on these things. Had a fantastic article. We'll see a couple of pictures from that, and I think maybe he's going to be talking here about the shooting of Barney Doyle at the Polo Grounds, and just fantastic information that he came up with. Some of the others have been on this. I was hoping Steve Trader might be here tonight. at the time I was working on this, and this book took forever, which I guess is the way it is. It's the only time I've worked with McFarland. But I had some big surgery on my hip in October 2014. And it was at least giving me a chance to catch up on things. And I was getting back into the Polo Grounds book, organizing it. And this doctor came, and it wasn't my doctor, he's an internist, Dan Stein. And we got to chatting, and he said, "What are you working on?" I said, "This Polo Grounds book." And he said, "Well, my dad knows about that. He was a Sabre member." And I started saying, "Well, who was your dad?" And by the time that was out of my mouth, I knew who his dad was Fred Stein, who wrote Under Coogan's Bluff and a lot of stuff on the Polo Grounds. And Dr. Stein, there you go. I've got that one too. Bill's holding it up. I think I scanned a photo of the cover, and it's in this book. Along with what Steve Trader did some years ago. Well, Dr. Stein said, so somebody in Sabre who interviewed my dad. I'll see if I can find that. And he left, and he came back a little while later. He had printed out this entire interview that Steve Trader had done with Fred Stein, and it was great. And I asked Steve if I could use it. He said yes. And so that's in there too. A lot of Bill Lamb wrote about the owners and landholders there, from Coogan to Andrew Friedman, all of that. And the two I remember the most are on both the Stonehams. And that's why I enjoyed the past few weeks that we had Rob talking about Horace Stoneham and Steve Trader on Charles Stoneham too. So this was an interesting project, an anthology. One of the things that I had to do was come up with essays from fans, and they could be both remembrances of just shorter things about what people remember about it, but I had to do that with the players too, and I was a little nervous, like, gee, am I going to get enough? The last player who would have played there was 1963. But I went through and started with the 2 years of the Mets on who played there and if they're still alive, and I used the Jack Smalling address book. If any of you have that, it's I first got this thing when it was in mimeograph form in 1973 to write to players for autographs, and I get a new edition every year for research. And I sent out 245 letters, and I thought, man, if I can get 10% back, that's going to be doing good. But it turned out to be about closer to 30%, because I think I got 70 back, and none of the Hall of Famers. That stuff won't even get through to them anymore. The Hall of Famers just get too much. But I heard back Bobby Shantz, Billy Pierce, Roger Craig, Jim Davenport, Don Larson, Carl Erskine, Billy Pierce, Maury Wills, Dallas Green. So a lot of notable people. And then in the essay section for the fans, longer things, Arnold Hino wrote a nice article. And he was nice. His wife Bonnie helped him because Arnold is legally blind now. I don't know if Ed Logan joined it. I've been in touch with Ed, but he wrote, the Polo Grounds was my playground, with his dad, Eddie, as the equipment manager, and Ed is the bat boy there. And between that and Jerry Schwab, whose dad, Matty, was a groundskeeper and lived in the Polo Grounds. They built an apartment under the left field stands. And there's stories of camping out overnight in center field. And Ed Logan talked about when the Giants were out of town, they take their bikes and ride up and down the ramps. And I envy any of you who've been there even one time. You know way more about it than I do. I learned a lot of the facts and figures on it, but there's no substitute for knowing what it was like. And to get to know a ballpark that well, for me, it was Met Stadium in Minnesota. I got to know that place very well. Not a classic ballpark. It was a nice place, but to have had those same experiences at the Polo Grounds. And I'm going to start sharing screen now, if we've got that figured out. My fascination came more with the shape of the ballpark. And this is something from, I guess, 1963, a little booklet. And I was always fascinated with ballparks because of their different shapes. That's why we're all fascinated by baseball stadiums, not football stadiums that all look alike pretty much. And since I was in Minnesota, I knew what Fenway Park looked like on TV and Yankee Stadium. And I think I remember watching the All-Star game at Wrigley Field. And I could imagine, if nothing else, at least what Crosley Field looked like just from that. But when I came to the Polo Grounds, I couldn't wrap my arms around, you know, the fences. They went out at 135 degrees. What was it like to be there and look out? It's like the fences just continued out with the foul line, and then there's this notch and this big distance. So I wanted to get pictures of it, which now it's really easy. But back then, it wasn't as easy. But I finally started collecting whatever pictures I could get. There was a place in Ossining, New York, Ossining, that sold postcards, and I would send in for postcards at different stadiums, not knowing what I was going to get. But there was this one. This is from the Mets years, as you can see from the ads that are on the outfield fences. And finally, you know, get some sense of what it looked like. Most fences will go out at a 90-degree angle from the foul line. This thing went out at 135 degrees. And but a little history that I had to learn when I did the first book, and I was aware that there are several different stadiums with this name, the Polo Grounds, going back to the 1800s. And the first one was just north of Central Park. And on the left there is a Sabre member named Larry Zuckerman, who would diagram these ballparks. You could see there were two diamonds one year, and that's because in 1883 you had a National League team and an American Association team that shared the grounds, and there was a West Diamond and an East Diamond. The National League team played on the East Diamond to the right. It was a lot nicer, and I still have never figured out with certainty if the American Association team played there when the Giants were out of town. Now, when both teams were at town at the same time, that's what you had set up with a canvas fence separating the two fields. And the West Diamond was never very nice, and so there's speculation that they just didn't use it unless they had to, if both teams are home at the same time. And on the right there, that's from 1889, when the city was finally going to take care of the Polo Grounds, cut 111th Street through it and take care of it. So the Giants, in a hurry, had to find a new place to play. They played at a couple places, including Staten Island, and then moved uptown to 155th Street and the 8th Avenue on the Harlem River. And can you see my pointers in there too? I think you can see it. That was the second version of the Polo Grounds in 1889, and they played there in 1890 as well. Just beneath the viaduct, under Coogan's Bluff. And in 1890, there's the Players League. And the Brotherhood built a ballpark just to the north of where the National League team was playing. And they had games going on sometimes side by side at the same time. This is a look too. This in the foreground is the Giants Park, and I don't know what year this is from. This section, the southern section, became known as Manhattan Field because in 1891, the National League team moved into the newer ballpark, the Brotherhood Park, which was just a nicer ballpark. So that became the third Polo Grounds. That was the Wood Ballpark. It's where Merkel's boner happened, and the 1905 World Series. It burned down couple of games into the 1911 season, and so the Giants rebuilt in a hurry and then added on. And this picture is from 1922 to 23. They extended the upper deck in left field before the grandstand ended. You can see where that is. Ended in foul territory. It went out into fair territory in right field, but eventually 1922 to 23 is when they extended it into the familiar look that we all know today, where the double decking went all the way out and eventually met the notch. There's a nice overhead look at it early on, before any of the housing even went up. Here on the lower part of the picture, nice overhead look. You see the Harlem River Speedway and the ramps that people could take down from there to get into the ballpark.
So this is the brush stairway over here.
Well, the brush stairway, I think, is here. These
right
ramps
here.
here, right there.
No, right here,
Yep,
yeah.
that's it.
Because there's a couple levels of bluffs that go down. And one is the brush stairway, which has been rehabilitated. Or when Brenda and I were there, we went to the Morris Jumel Mansion and then wandered down here. And this was, in disrepair. I climbed over the railing. I do a lot of things that make Brenda nervous.
Yeah.
And got a picture because on the landing there is where it says John Brush Stairway. And I know that's been redone, and the group, maybe your group, was out there when they dedicated that new one. And this is how close it was to Yankee Stadium. This was the connector line that came out, but this is the McCombs Dam Bridge. And I've walked that many times to go between the sites. 4th of July game in 1997, I was able to, it's 4th of July, I was able to park my car right here on the viaduct and walk across it to Yankee Stadium. And here's one that sees the two ballparks from the other end, Yankee Stadium with the Polo Grounds in the foreground. Some pictures of the Polo Grounds you can kind of see up above the outfield section there. You can even see Yankee Stadium. And I like this one. It's hard to pick out the Polo Grounds. This is of the George Washington Bridge. My favorite, I like bridges, and that's my favorite bridge in New York. And there is the Polo Grounds, and Yankee Stadium would be across the river, but not in the picture there. So here's a nice panoramic that finally shows that notch. And this would have been, I think, the 1930s. They had advertisements on the scoreboard or on the fences when the Giants were there through the 1940s. And there's just that barren wall out there with some windows and the people have hit it into the notch. In fact, I've got a picture of that. This was before those batter's eyes.
About 5 minutes.
But we know that that a few players of Hank Aaron, Joe Adcock, Lou Brock, and Luke Easter hit home runs into the distant bleachers out there. And this is the 1951 World Series with Gil McDougald of the Yankees hitting a grand slam. And you get a little closer look at the whole stadium, a nice panoramic. There's Yankee Stadium to the right of the scoreboard peeking out the top. There's one. Ralph Kiner hit this ball, and Bobby Thompson is having to chase it down, and players in the clubhouse are opening the doors to look out, see what's going on. Talk about
Dude, excuse me 1 second. I cannot see everybody, but somebody is talking. If you please not interrupt, Stu. It's not nice, and I know nobody's doing it intentionally, but if you could either mute yourself or stop the background chatter. Thank you. Stu, sorry.
Yep, no, that's okay. So that gives you a good look at the notch. And, we talk about the sign stealing of 1951 and where they were getting the signals with the binoculars and relaying them to people in the bullpen with an electronic device, and they were signaling the batter. This is the Eddie Grant Monument, of course, and there are also other monuments for football and baseball players on the wall.
Hey, Stu, could you go back to that one picture? I have one question on that.
This one?
Yeah, what's on top there, that structure above the monument? That one.
Speakers?
Speakers.
Speaker, okay.
They kind of look like they had them caged in. And obviously we have fans here, not that anybody was going to hit one, all the way out there. But if anybody did, you didn't have to clear this for the home run. You just had to clear that.
Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
And these are a couple pictures that Dan provided. That's Barney Doyle, who was shot. What year was it, Dan? 1950?
Yeah.
July 4th, 1950.
Yeah, and he was sitting in the far reaches of left center field in the upper deck, and Dan provided this photo too.
The election's going
of where the shot was taken from. Just somebody probably not trying to hurt anybody, just firing it and killed somebody. And I'm not trying to plug the book or anything like that, but I can tell you if you buy this anthology, it's worth it just for Dan's article on this. It's really interesting, and it gets into a lot of the socioeconomic things of everything and what happened with that. It's my favorite in the entire book, and I'd recommend it just for that. And I know Dan's writing more on it. I think, Dan, you're planning a book just on this. Is that correct?
No, not really, although I have toyed around with that idea. I'm still always looking for more information on it. I mean, I have other writing projects going on, but I'm looking into it. And then in 2025, there's a lot of information that will get released on the alleged shooter, Robert Peebles, who was 14 years old and allegedly shot from that rooftop. So when that comes out, there'll probably be some more background information on him and his growing up in that area. So it's kind of on the back burner. If I could quit my day job, I would dedicate a lot more time to really trying to track down more, because I felt like I just kind of scratched the surface on some of the issues that were going on. There were kind of like two different things going on at the time. You've got the giants there, but then you've also got the decline of the neighborhood. And the two did not marry well.
And that's what was well covered in it, and what I thought was really interesting too. So
we will have, Dan will be addressing the group in hopefully February. So we'll have a whole session on this incident.
Stu, are all of the photos, I'm muted. Oh,
no, I can hear you.
Okay. Are all of the photos you're shown in your book?
Some, but not all. These two are, I'd have to look. I think the McDougal photo, I've got at least one, might be this one that shows the stadiums together.
The photos are wonderful.
They are great.
And
I love that one with the George Washington Bridge.
Yeah, I've walked the GW. I've walked the Golden Gate. I'm not able to walk the Verrazano Narrows. I'd have to run it. I have to get in the New York Marathon. But I've walked most of the bridges in New York and driven over them. I like bridges. Does anybody know this old, this old wall? You've got this on the one side, whatever you call that thing that sticks up, but not on the other. And I don't know the reason for that. And
somebody probably stole it.
Well, good. Whoever could pull that off, I applaud that person.
So they took the Eddie Grant plaque.
Well, that was after the last Giants game, and I talked to in the first Polo Grounds book I did. Ev Parker, who's a policeman there, who has his theories that the cops supposedly stopped some kids. I was there in the last football game at Met Stadium in Bloomington. I got some chairs from it downstairs because people were tearing that apart. But you had to kind of avoid the police on your way out if you wanted to hang on to your booty. And supposedly the cops got the kids and they rescued the plaque. But this F. Parker said, you weren't going to turn that in. You'd incur the wrath of the desk sergeant who was going to have to log it and everything else. He said it's probably in somebody's basement there. Well, you all know what that one is, a colorized version of Andy Pafko looking up at Bobby Thompson's home run. If you would ever ask Pafko what he was thinking, he just said he wasn't seeing a ball going out. He was seeing like a wallet filled with money that was flying out over him. He was computing how much money that they lost by not winning the pennant. And this is a colorized version of the catch. And somebody looking out there, it's been said that was Joe Garagiola.
Joe Garagiola, that's the story.
Okay, has that been confirmed or?
Well, I don't know if it's confirmed, but that's the story.
That's a good
Garagiola used to tell that story.
Okay.
Okay, then it's not confirmed.
It doesn't mean it's true.
Hey, Pope.
But and of course, while Wirtz hit this thing over 400 feet, John Pasteur is a stadium architecture expert. He gets into pointing out, no, it was not at 460 feet. He's tried to really figure it out, but obviously it was a long blast by Vic Wirtz that turned into an out, and a couple innings later, it's 257 down the line, and Dusty Rhodes parked one right in there. Dave Pope jumping for it, and
Stu, I'm sorry. Could you go back to the catch? I just noticed something I want to ask you about.
Sure, yeah.
I know, as Willie Mays is running back, there's no warning track per se as we look at today's stadium.
I'm wondering if there's anything. Yeah, it's you got the dirt here, and there maybe there's a little bit of a strip.
It was very narrow.
Maybe they figured they didn't need it because who's going to be running full steam that far out? That's a good point.
Stu, have we ever been able to identify which of the guys in the first two rows there behind Mays is Arno Hanno? who wrote.
Oh, was he in one of the first two rows? I'd have to go back and look
No,
at
he was on the other side.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, he was in the left center field bleachers.
Okay.
And so this is the game one home run in the 10th inning that Dusty Rhodes won, and this is his home run the next day. I just saw something on a website that this home run was identified as the game one homer, but no, this clearly wasn't. I mean, it was. You can tell by the outfielder there, like Dave Pope thought he had a chance of catching it, and he did, because it barely cleared, and Rhodes home run the next day. I don't know if it was an upper decker or something like that. But you can see the outfielder not even really giving chase to it. And I think it's Jocko Conlon's the umpire there signaling fair, so he must have hit it right down the line, but a little bit deeper. That's Willie Mays, just a nice look out to left field. Somewhere in here, I think it was in here where the door was to the Schwab's apartment where they lived, as Jerry Schwab described it.
What year was that picture?
This was 57.
Yeah,
Ed Logan, the bat boy there.
Right
so
there.
this would be Eddie? Ed?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
There's nobody there. Wow.
And this is just such a great, that's Dick Grote. In what position did Dick Grote play? Shortstop. There he is. He's approaching the warning track. That's how that ballpark was, with shortstop who might be the one to catch a pop fly down the line. That's just the Mets years, of course, when they painted it blue and they put ads back on the scoreboard there.
Wow.
And then this is, I kind of like the Mets years just because there's a little color in there. They went to the Rheingold sign, some nice bright red in there. I think this is a 63 home opener against the Cardinals. And this, was there, the Giants years, was this about all they really had for a scoreboard? It was.
Yeah, they had one down each line.
Yeah, boy, you know, even Wrigley Field, center field scoreboard was more elaborate than that. And finally, with the Mets, they did get a scoreboard out in center field. And this is like an overlay or something that they put in front of it because they have that big opening so you can still see the windows. But they were able to put the batting order on a line score and things like that. So I don't know where this card came from. I don't think it came out in 63, which was the year they had that style card, but it does give it a better look. And in the late, this was in between. You know what? This couldn't have been. I was going to say that this was in between when the Giants left in the Mets game, but that Chesterfield ad would have been earlier than that because in the Giants' final year, they had the Knickerbocker.
Chesterfield.
Yeah, so but they did so many different things with this, and during the years, both Ebbets Field and the Polo Grounds, before Ebbets was demolished after the teams left, they put tracks in there. And then the final photo I have here is just, I think it's Army and Duke playing. It was kind of nicely set up, you know, a rectangular shaped stadium for football. Not that you'd get a ton of seats, you know, on the sidelines, but a little bit better. So I think that's all the photos that I've got, and we can open it up, talk more about it. How many of you, I don't know if there's a way to raise your hand, but how many of you were at a game at the Polo Grounds?
I was.
Good. Well, you know way more about it than I do. I can look up information. And
I went in 57 and earlier.
Okay.
I caught one of the last games. There was nobody there but me and the pigeons.
I was there. It wasn't the last game.
At the last Giants game?
Yep.
Yeah, Giants.
Hey, in one of the photos that you showed of the scoreboard, one of the World Series home runs, there was a sign that promoted a football Giants game.
Oh, yeah,
on October 17th. Go back a little bit.
Yeah, I think they were playing the Chicago Cardinals.
Yes, Ollie Matson played. I was at that game.
You were at that game that was after? Yeah, there you go. Giants versus Chicago Cardinals. And then Fordham in Boston College a couple nights before that.
See, October 17th, that was the first football game I saw. I was, by then I was 9 years old.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't remember what the dates were of the World Series that year. They were early October.
Actually, late September.
Oh,
September
that's right.
29th was game 1.
Yeah. So the next football game they were advertising was still a few weeks off then too.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I meant to say this last week. If you go back to that Rheingold sign, the H and the E look a little different because they lit up if there was a hit or an error, you know, on a close play. Let's see if you can see it.
What did the scoreboard flash for the guy who gets shot?
Yeah.
So the H and the E here.
The H and E are a little bit lighter if you look at them.
Yeah.
They're not
And
the same color as the other letters.
did they do
But
that
there's
with the
bulbs on it.
Chesterfield sign too?
I guess. I don't.
Yeah, I think they
I just
did.
noticed it last week. I'm sure they did.
The
Because it has
Chesterfield
enough
sign
letters.
had it's a hit.
Yeah, and the H would light up or
That's
the E
right.
for an error.
Let's
Yeah.
find the Chesterfield. And I think they did that at Ebbetsfield with a Schaefer sign.
Correct.
I know we've got a.
Yeah,
a hit. But did they do like a hit and an error on
Probably the same
those?
thing.
But yeah, I think a few of those in Ebbetsfield too did that as well. Yeah, it's you know, Ebbets gets all the attention. I guess if you want charm and the neighborhood ambiance a little bit more, when I wrote about it, you know, that was a charming little ballpark, Ebbets, and the Polo Grounds was an edifice. You know, it was just towered over everything, and it was up there in an area with, you know, you didn't have that many streets or neighborhoods. You probably wouldn't walk to the game. I don't know that you did at Ebbets. If you lived nearby, you would. But all of it, and then talking, you know, about the move of the teams. You know, it was, and I think both Rob and Steve covered it, and I've written about this kind of stuff too. These charming classic ballparks were great pre-World War II, but after the war, well, of course, people are driving more, and they didn't have much for parking, and people were moving out. You know, you had cars, you had highways, and that brought the suburban flight, or what you could call the white flight, and then the people in the suburbs were afraid to drive back in because of the demographics of the area changed, and they were nervous about that. And that's when the ballparks started going out to more open areas. And I'm familiar with it in Minnesota. And the Minneapolis Millers were a Giants farm club, and there was talk about the Giants moving here after they opened Met Stadium because it was a very nice place. And I guess both Horace and O'Malley are going to be villains, but I always thought O'Malley looked the bigger villain or looked more avaricious or something. And one thing that Horace said that at least I think made him more understandable to people when somebody said, gee, you know, if you move the Giants out, don't you care about the kids? And he said, yeah, I do, but I haven't seen any of their dads lately. It was a good thing to say that kind of could at least bring people around to say, yeah, he's got to do something. He can't survive. And while there was more talk about a new stadium for the Dodgers, whether it was going to be in Brooklyn or Queens, and then there were some of those ballparks on stilts and everything else in Manhattan, but none of that happened, and it did seem destined that they were going to move. And Steve and others talked about how they might have moved to Minnesota. I was just being born at the time, but looking at it and going back and looking at research when Sports Illustrated did a big story on Met Stadium, and I think Stoneham and some of the others from the Giants were there, and it was a nice, Met Stadium was a nice stadium. It was 3 decks and then with this cantilever construction with no posts. So it was a good place for baseball. It was nice that it was built in the 50s and we didn't get into the 60s with the functional multi-purpose stadiums that were the cookie cutter ballparks. I think maybe DC Stadium in Washington was the first of that breed. We eventually got an ugly ballpark in Minnesota when they built the Metrodome, but at least we had a real baseball stadium. It was bad for football, but you know, who knows if the Giants would have moved here. And I've talked before about how they had bought some land in 1948 just west of the Minneapolis city limits, and they never built on that. And if they had, it's not that the Giants would have moved in there, but when the teams finally started moving, and Minneapolis, along with other cities, got committees to try to lure a major league team here. And the disadvantage to the Twin Cities was that they didn't have any place even that could serve as a temporary home. So they made a little bit of a gesture at getting the St. Louis Browns, although Bill Veeck may have already been committed to selling that team to Baltimore. But then the next year, Philadelphia moved to Kansas City. And if this ballpark would have been built by the Giants, it would have been built for the minor league team, but it could have at least served as a few years as the home of a new team until they could build a new stadium. I hear a lot of people here in Minnesota keep talking about how if the Giants moved here, they would have played in St. Louis Park, because the Giants held on to that land in St. Louis Park for many years and sold it in the 70s. And by that time, the lot was even called Candlestick Park. And that's not really true. If they would have, by that time, if they would have moved when they moved after the 57 season, it definitely would have been at Met Stadium. And why they never did build on that land just to the west of the city limits, me and some others have tried to figure that out. It was in St. Louis Park and with the Historical Society. Some of the reasoning given is the Korean War, but the National Production Authority that stopped construction on ballparks, but they bought that land in late 48 and were even talking about having a new stadium ready by 1950. So they would have had it either finished or underway by the time the Korean War started. So there's a lot of mysteries with the Polo Grounds, with baseball in general. Stuff I probably won't figure out before I die, but keep searching for. And when I get my time machine, before I go down to the grassy knoll in Dallas and figure out who shot JFK or anything like that, my first stop is going to be the Polo Grounds. Go back into maybe the Mets years, and then go back earlier, and then get to Ebbets Field and Crosley Field. So that's what I'm doing when I get my time machine, because I look at pictures and just wish I could have been there. And that's why I envy all of you folks who have spent time and actually been at the Polo Grounds.
Stu, you mentioned Crosley Field. Have you thought about, or I have one book on Crosley, but that is the coolest small ballpark I have ever been in. Have you ever thought of, or do you given thought to a book on Crosley?
Well, that's been pretty well done by Greg Rhodes is one. He did a really good book
I've got
on
this
it.
one here.
Hold it up.
It's
I think I have that
Greg
one.
Rhodes book.
Yeah. And, you know, if I go to Crosley, I'm going before 1960, because that's when all those buildings across the street, when they were finally starting to transform that, they're going to have the highway going in. The laundry was there. And, you know, like I said, I like color. And you really got the color of Crosley Field. I've got some color photographs of it from when those buildings were still up. That would be number 3. After the Polo Grounds and Ebbets Field, my next stop with the time machine is Cincinnati, and then, I don't know, I'll do Pennsylvania. I don't care which, Shibe Park or Forbes Field, and then after that, Sportsman's Park in St. Louis and Braves Field, where you can still visit the field. It's used by Boston University and Griffith Stadium. Of the classic ballparks, those are the 8 that I was never at. I got to 6 of the others, including Yankee Stadium in '73 before they remodeled it, and then the ones that hung around longer, like Comiskey and Tiger Stadium, and of course Fenway Park and Wrigley Field. But I'd like to, one way or the other. I don't know if they'll ever invent the time machine, but I'm going to those 8 ballparks first thing.
Steve, Stu, here's some insight on the Polo Grounds. In 1955, the New York Giant football team was the biggest tenant of the National Exhibition Company, and the PM 58 on Sugar Hill, which is closer to the subway stop in Manhattan, and that was the death knell, losing the master tenant, why the the New York Giant football team moved across the river where they could park at McCombs Dam Park, a much greater, many more acres to park when they built that public school in Manhattan. So with the Giants losing their master tenant and the neighborhood deteriorating, that's when attendance started to fall, especially with the white flight to the suburbs.
Yeah, that makes sense because what was the last year of the football Giants was 1955. They moved to Yankee Stadium, and then, you know, eventually they got the Titans, who became the Jets. And I don't think too many people. That's the owner's name, Sonny Werblin. He'd be running through the neighborhood trying to hand out tickets just to get people.
Harry Wismer.
Harry Wismer, yeah. Just to get people in there. That's a good point, Mars. I hadn't really thought of that. The loss of the football team had a big impact on that too.
Here's another
closing deals and netting their sellers over 17% over asking price on.
I don't know what that's about, but back to the podcast. You know, I think that O'Malley was a much better coach than because he was making money at Ebbets Field. When you drew 1 million people a year in attendance, he was making money back in those days, with the highest salary being $50,000. So, you know, and another important point was the Chicago Cubs in Wrigley Field only drew about 500,000 that year, but they didn't.
Yeah, it's just looking at all that and what they were both facing. I've really enjoyed Rob Garrett and Steve Trader's presentations about 3 weeks ago on the Stonehams, and I think it came up too. Hall of Fame, and probably Horace Stoneham isn't really going to be considered, but I think it was Steve who pointed out the difference between Horace Stoneham and Tom Yawkey. And, you know, Yawkey was somehow publicly beloved, and part of it was that his players, you know, loved him so much, they said. But considering the racism in that organization and the progressiveness of the Giants and Dodgers, and of course the National League in general, it's Bill James always points out, you don't make a Hall of Fame argument for somebody by saying, hey, this guy is in there, then why not this guy? But when I was thinking about that after listening to Steve's presentation, that yeah, Horace Stoneham will be much more deserving of the Hall of Fame, and put together good teams. And I suppose at the time that Yawkey was elected to the Hall of Fame, people weren't really given the racial. I mean, now people pay attention to that. Here in Minnesota, they took Calvin Griffith's statue down at Target Field on Juneteenth. You know, this is 3 weeks after, just a few miles away, George Floyd was killed, murdered, whatever. I've used the term murdered, and someone said we got to wait for the verdict on that. But with everything hitting the head on that I don't know that Yawkey would get voted in today. And it is the kind of stuff for the Giants and Stoneham that should be recognized, their progressiveness in that, which helped, of course, also help build their teams. The Yankees were so slow in integrating that, you know, by the time they did, they still had their stars and a few years left, but a lot of American League teams like that. So I've become more of a Stoneham fan, at least Horace, and learned a lot of interesting things from Bill Lamb's article in the book and from Steve's presentation on Charles.
Well, I'm not the biggest Stoneham fan because he took my team away from me when I was 10 years old, and at that point, you're a quintessential baseball fan. But the thing is, Horace could have figured out a few more things. Like, it was the perfect football stadium, for crying out loud. It really was, because it was oval. They could have made it into a football stadium and looked for other places along with investors. See, that's the key that Peter Gowan did. He looked for investors to keep the team. Horace lost the Giants in New York and San Francisco. So, you know, like, but O'Malley was making money. And O'Malley was given the swamps in Flushing Meadow by Robert Moses and turned it down.
Yeah, and then where he moved in Chavez Ravine, there's
Got
been a
that
lot
for free.
written about that. I think Andy McHugh and Rob Garrett and others have talked about what that did to the Mexican community there too. So, I've never really taken sides on that. That they were New Yorkers with connections to the Minneapolis and St. Paul, since both those teams had one of their top farm teams in St. Paul or Minneapolis too. But I've always, I think, been a little bit more sympathetic, and I understand, Mars. Doesn't matter what, when they take your team. I was too young to remember the departure of the Minneapolis Lakers, although it was a local businessman and politician, Bob Short, who then, of course, moved Washington out of there. But here he was not a popular politician either. And then I do remember when the Minnesota North Stars moved, and Norm Green owned them, and one of the final North Stars games, and just constantly chanting, "Norm sucks all night," for any reason. Any owner that moves a team out it's a huge loss. It's at least I wasn't as big a hockey fan as some. I wouldn't have missed the North Stars the way I would have a Major League Baseball team. And in New York, of course, you still had a baseball team, but I'm guessing that people were fans of the Dodgers and the Giants. They weren't going to really warm up to the Yankees, were they?
No,
They didn't.
if you were a Giants fan, you hated the Yankees, but you hated the Dodgers even more. They had that rivalry over to the West Coast too. But the thing is, there are so many things in the mix here about how much business acumen you have to keep the Giants in New York, because certainly the Mets are successful.
Yeah, and originally I read that some of the Dodgers fans, when the Mets came in, were a little cool on it because they were going to at least start by playing in the Giants' old ballpark. And they played there longer than they thought. They played there a year longer than they thought they were going to. But but even there, it was that's Giants territory. So I don't know what the Brooklyn people or the old Dodgers fans really thought of that. But then they get to Queens and the new breed of Mets fans, and had a place that was, if nothing else, neutral territory between Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Well, they employ both colors, and all the old Giant and Dodger fans that I knew that remained in the New York area became Met fans. And but the Giant, there were still some Giant fans like me. I left New York for San Francisco, so I remember going to see Marischal and Mays and McCovey and the Blues. And the thing is, after a few years, Stoneham lost the team. They were going to go to Toronto, and then Bob Lurie bought the team, and again another silver spoon grab. And because his father, Lewis, the one with the acumen, just like Charles Stoneham, and the Stoneham family had more business acumen than their sons. So Bob Lurie lost the team. They were on the 11th hour. They were going to Florida, and Peter McGowan, who was, I think his grandfather was part of Meredith Fierce Penner Smith, but he did have business acumen, and he was CEO of Safeway, and he saved them, and he built a group that would be investors, which what Stoneham could have done many, many years ago in New York, and then in San Francisco as well.
Mars.
This topic can be argued for centuries. I said this a few weeks ago. The Giants and Dodgers leave. The Giant games are on WINS radio. For at least 2 years, maybe a third. And every Giant, Pirate, and Cardinal road game were televised. So yes, we lost our team, no question about it, but we didn't completely lose touch. And I always feel that the Giant fans, because of Mays, who was still young, stayed with them. Dodger fans, that was, Brooklyn in those days was like another country. And they were more upset than the Giant fans were. And I talked to Gary last week about this, and to some of my Dodger fan friends. They won 2 years later in '59. They wouldn't dare bring the trophy to New York, even as recently as a couple of weeks ago. Giants brought it back 3 times. I mean, the first time, I remember watching some of the video. Gary, what, 1,000 people in the hotel? All the Giant fans came out of the woodwork?
Well, right.
Jamie, you don't go back to the Polo Grounds, do you? You would have been there in the early years of Candlestick, is that right?
Well,
Jamie,
let Jamie talk.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Sorry.
Hey, can
Jamie,
anybody hear
Hi
me?
guys, sorry, I'm driving or else I'd put the video on. So I so appreciate everybody's thinking and commenting. The only additional context I'd like to add is if we had had more money and there had been a different business that supported the team, I think you would have seen a lot of different business decisions made. The money was dwindling. When my dad joined the team in 1966, he was trying to get my grandfather to understand the finances were not in good shape and there wasn't any money. So you're right. I wish trust me, I wish he had gotten investors. I wish we could have found a different way. But the hard part with San Francisco as well is San Francisco didn't want the Giants. Even when Bob put them up for sale, it was Walter Shorenstein who said, wait, they can't leave. And Walter brought in the group that Peter then took over. So I think there's a lot of dynamics. I wish we had the money of the Wrigleys. Oh my God, this would all be different. So just keep that in mind. There was just a different financial setup for the family that the team was all we had.
Jamie, is your uncle Feeney, Chuck Feeney, is that your uncle?
He's my cousin, but yeah.
Okay, and then Katie. I got to know Katie because she was a supervisor of official scores. So yeah.
Right.
I asked her to write maybe an essay on the Polo Grounds, and she just said she didn't remember them all that well. So.
Yeah, and you know what? And again, and we just didn't talk about it as a family. We talked about what was happening today. Today was back for me for the 60s and 70s. But my grandfather didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. He loved it, but he was of the moment. He didn't spend time in the past, which I regret because I didn't get the wealth of information I wish I had. So yeah, he was a different man. He was obviously smart. I listened to everybody, and I'm enraptured on these calls. I listened to everything, and because of him, it all happened. So I just want you to keep that in mind. He wasn't perfect, but my goodness, listen to the treasure that's here that we all get to share. So, but we didn't have any extra money. That was the problem.
Jamie, let me add to that.
Yeah.
My family was huge Giant fans. My dad, all my uncles, my grandfathers, etc. Nobody was angry when the Giants left. And they were sad about it, but they understood because they were going to games where, like they said, they could sit in any seat they wanted to. They could probably sit in a dugout if they wanted to. There was no fans. So they understood the fact that the business was not going well and something had to be done. And after the team left, there was no animosity within the family, and everybody remained Giant fans. And whenever they came back east to the Polo Grounds and then later to Shea, we always went to the games.
Yeah.
Rich, did you go down to Philadelphia to see them play?
Yeah, we went down to Connie Mack a number of times. I have to say, and this is fact, it's unfortunate, but it's fact, it was really dangerous going to Connie Mack in its later years.
It was.
Oh, it was terrible. I mean, you get stuck up with a handgun standing in line waiting to buy a ticket.
You had to pay people to watch your car.
Oh, it was terrible.
I know.
It was terrible. And I'll have to add, my dad and uncles used to park up on Coogan's Bluff in the neighborhood. They did that for years and years and years, no problem. They came down the brush stairway and went into the stadium at home plate. After about 1950, their cars started to get broken into and eventually busted up. And so they'd have to park down in the parking lot. That was just reality. And fortunately, they took me to the stadium twice in 1957, and then we went a bunch of times in 1962 and 63. But my main point was we stayed Giants fans through all that, and there was never any animosity towards Forrest Stoneham like there was towards the Dodgers and O'Malley.
Jamie, have you made any additional headway in your quest?
You know, I have not, and Stu, I certainly also appreciate hearing you reconsider thinking about Horace and his role, not only in the Giants, but in baseball. Because again, you all, as I've said, and you're tired of me saying it, you all got to see this. I too am wishing I could have seen it, what you've seen. It is the best of baseball history. So,
Did anybody hear
again,
me?
we'll.
Yeah.
I want you to know I'm here.
Thank you, Mo.
Hi, Mo.
Hi,
Mo.
Fred
Oh.
Cohn, do you have a question, Fred? You usually come up with good ones.
Mo. Oh, hey.
To address
Anybody else have a question for Stu?
what comment address
Mars, your mic is god awful. I got to tell you.
Oh. It looks like I'm the oldest person on this broadcast today, and I started to go to Polo Grounds in 1980, 1942. Saw Mel Ott, Ernie Lombardi, all of them.
Oh.
What's that?
Could somebody turn off the politics, please? We can't hear, and I don't see who it is, and I don't want to shut down everybody.
I have a comment towards Rich and Dan. The Giants recreated so Les Kiter, the great Les Kiter, was the announcer.
That's what I said before. WINS.
Yeah,
we listened to him.
Time for Giants baseball, recreated by Les Kiter. Brought to you by Northwest Orient Airlines.
This is the Cubbies' first game, the Marischal 16-inning game. And then my mother went to go to school.
Can you imagine kids today listening to the radio to a recreation? We either had to be crazy or baseball nuts.
I was listening to the game, to the 16-inning Marischal Spawn game, I believe. And then I told my mom, she woke me up to go to school. I said, I'm too tired. She says, I know you've been listening to that game all night. It came on at 11 o'clock at night.
That's a game I would have really liked to have been at. We don't, I think we were talking last week about Kevin Cashpool and Snell. That's just the way. That's the way it is. We're not going to have the complete games. Not even what we got to see here with Jack Morris scoring 10 shutout innings. But when I go back and just read about games, to sit there and watch Marischal and Spahn go 15 scoreless, and then Willie Mays end it with a home run on the bottom of the 16th. That sounds to me about as good as it would get.
Stu, did you know that Willie Mays is the only player in history that hit a home run in every inning, 1 through 16?
Yeah. That's interesting. We were just before a lot of people came on here, we were talking about who was it that was at gone to the fugitive guy, the guy in the Fugitive Society.
David Jansen.
David.
No, it's one of our people here.
Bill Clink.
What's that?
Bill Clink.
Bill, yeah, and Bill went to the Richard Kimball's house in LA, but was down in Birmingham or Westview and had the address of Willie Mays' house. We were talking about visiting that, but at least in Minneapolis, if any of you folks here, I'll give you a good tour. Minneapolis, if you're ever here, and it's going to be the river and the lakes. It's not going to be that stupid shopping center in Bloomington, other than I'll take you out there to see where Met Stadium was. But in South Minneapolis, about maybe 10 blocks from Nicollet Park, when Willie Mays played there, is where he lived. And, Ted Williams lived a little farther south. So as I mentioned, in 1988, the first time I got to Dallas, I went to Mickey Mantle's house and still regret never having the guts to go up and pound on the door. But I'll give you a baseball tour, any of you, if you're ever in Minneapolis.
Well, thank you.
So you know Scott Bush from Sabre?
Yeah, he's from southwestern Minnesota.
He worked for the St. Paul team, I believe.
And I didn't know him at that time. I never met him until he became CEO. He called me. Well, Mike Beck called me and said, hey, we got this guy down now in Charleston who's applying for that. Can you put in a word for him? And I talked to Scott, who's from southwestern Minnesota, but then, you know, he was with the Saints and then with Vex Club in Charleston. His wife's a veterinarian and didn't really, you know, she could become a vet in Phoenix area too. And if they were going to have heat, I guess they wanted dry heat rather than hurricane heat. So I have met him at the Sabre conventions. But yeah, I didn't know him at that time. I didn't get to know him till the last couple of years.
You know, when I have a sports meeting here in Surprise in Sun City Grand, sometimes I wear one of my Willie May shirts or whatever the heck it is. And there's always a guy in the group, Gary, you know, Charlie Reynolds. He's a Cleveland fan. Well, the speaker that day was Denny Matthews, the Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Royals. And this guy, Charlie, gets up, you know, half kidding. He says, "Why do you always wear that shirt?" And he's a Cleveland guy. So he's going back to the sweep. So Denny Matthews says, "You know, I got to tell you an interesting story about the shirt that Steve is wearing and about the play that Mays made. I once had a chance to interview Joe DiMaggio. And I asked Joe DiMaggio, would you have made that catch?" And Joe DiMaggio says, "I would have made the catch and I wouldn't have lost my hat." It just went down.
Here's something interesting. Joe DiMaggio made an over-shoulder catch in the 1936 World Series. In the game, and it went back into indentation towards the Eddie Grant Memorial. Hank was it? There was
Hank Lieber. Hank Lieber.
Yep.
Hit the ball. DiMaggio caught it and didn't break stride. Went all the way up the clubhouse steps to end the game. That I got from during the strike when they recreated the games on radio. The '84 strike.
Anybody else have any questions for Stu?
Hey, Stu, why don't you, I'm going to put you to work here a little bit. Why don't you talk a little bit about how the ballpark, the version of the Polo Grounds that burned down and then was quickly rebuilt in 1911 and lasted for several years when they did it. They really made the Polo Grounds really attractive looking with a lot of ornamentation that didn't survive until the times of the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, that was ornate on the facing of the upper deck and the facade on the roof. I think it was the crests of the different teams. I think in here there's some pictures of it. Yeah, they rebuilt the Polo Grounds. I mean, enough within 3 months that they moved back in there and then expanded it. But it was steel and concrete. The touching story of John Brush using his wheelchair and looking down and saying to Elsie, his wife, "Will you stand by me as we rebuild this in steel and concrete?" But why they got rid of that? On the first Polo Grounds book I did, it's a picture of Babe Ruth hitting there and looking out towards right field, and you can really see that stuff. I don't know why they got rid of it. One of the mysteries as to why did they build it in the same horseshoe type of shape. And in this anthology, John Bastier addresses that as to, you know, and is critical of them, that they could have built it in a better shape. But I was happy they did. I don't think I would have had that fascination for the ballpark had they done it. And well, for many years I was collecting photos of it. It was in '97, 4th of July, and I was in the area, so I got up real early. And you know, Manhattan is the best place in the world to go driving through on 4th of July or a Sunday morning when there's no traffic. And so I finally went to the site, and not thinking about it, I park on 155th Street, and then, oh gee, I'm above the site, and there are some stairs that are still there, like 150 steps down to the river level. But just being in the place of it all and looking on the river on one side and the bluffs on the other, I just it renewed my fascination that just got me going on learning more information and then saying, okay, I guess I might as well do a book. And it goes through all of those. But first, before they expanded it in the 22-23, the ornamentation on it, but that's when the grandstand was kind of a J or a fish hook, that it didn't go into foul territory in left field, but it extended out into right field.
Stu, I've read in newspapers at the time, and it was in the 1930s when they took that ornamentation down, that they were made out of concrete and pieces of it had begun falling off, which of course it was dangerous, and that it was very high maintenance. So around 1933, they did some modifications in the ballpark, and they took the ornamentation down.
Well, that would make sense if it's a maintenance thing and it was getting dangerous. Not as easy to maintain if that was all concrete. I guess I wasn't even sure what kind of material that was.
Yeah, it was concrete. So once it started crumbling, that became real dangerous to the box seat holders.
Yeah. Well, a few stadiums have had that, and Yankee Stadium had an expansion joint. Whatever year it was, they had to move over, play a game at Shea Stadium.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, both O'Malley and Stoneham never talked about sharing a stadium, no matter what borough it would be in. And when O'Malley turned down the Swamps in Flushing Meadow, the 7 Flushing line ran right there. It was perfect access for mass transportation and vehicles as well. The thing is, there was a lack of foresight by probably both Stoneham and O'Malley to not share a stadium or build a stadium in New Jersey, like where the Giants and Jets share. These different times, but there seemed to be a lack of business acumen to come up with a better solution.
Well, the politics of New York, and Robert Moses and everything like that, definitely interesting. We got a great tour of Brooklyn, but from a native a few years ago, John Lombarda from Elias Sports Bureau, because we were there for the Sabre convention, and usually we're just there in January for a few days for the official scores meetings, and John gave us the best tour, and one of the people in our group from Minnesota got very excited and went by Barclays Center, because that was, I guess, one of the places that
was
O'Malley
the
had
place.
in mind. That was the place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the stadium is supposed to be built.
Yeah. Would they have, if they had moved to Queens, would they have kept the designation Brooklyn?
Good question.
Don't know.
No, that was one of the things he said. We're not the Queens Dodgers. We're Brooklyn.
Right.
He wasn't moving to Queens. No way.
Yeah. Well, that part I could understand.
He would have moved to Jersey City first. He played there 6 or 7 games.
Well,
It's a good move. They got a beautiful stadium, 3rd oldest ballpark. Still as nice as it was when they started. 20,000 cars. He got everything he wanted.
Yep.
Say what you want.
Moses, he turned down a lot of fights where teams wanted to move. The Giants, they had some kind of effort for the Hudson Docks, where the Jacob Javits Center is. But another site was the Bronx side of the Whitestone Bridge. Of course, O'Malley wanted the Barclays Center. He totally snuffed off the Flushing Meadow Swamps. He wanted out. And then, of course, Shevers Ravine with the eviction of all the Mexican families that lived there. He got his way, but I think he was a much more shrewd businessman than Stoneham.
Anybody else have
There's
any
another book that just came out called Stealing Home. Talks about it's a newer book, kind of like the one Andy McHugh wrote, but again, this is about the Dodgers, like Mars just said, taking away the area from the Mexicans, and pretty interesting story about all that went on there, and not everything was, kosher, so to speak.
Not by that one. That's not by Andy McHugh. Is that right?
No, but it's that Stealing Home. It came out the last 6 months.
I think I've heard of that. I love Andy McHugh's stuff, and I see him speak at the Sabre convention.
Yeah, he's Rob Garrett's twin. They travel together.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe get together with those two. And
you come out to Arizona spring training, or you've never done that?
I can tell you what. A couple of years ago, my wife, who was on this call, she does the field timing, and she's been down to Houston a couple times at the Astros ballpark to get trained there. And besides official scoring, I do the data casting, but I was going to get trained in when they thought there was going to be a pitch count clock, whatever, 2 or 3 years ago. And so they were going to send us down to spring training, and I'd never been to spring training in Arizona. And I can give you all a tip too. You know, one of the things I like to do is visit the graves of Hall of Famers. And I have not been to the Alcor Life Extension Foundation yet, where Ted Williams is. And, you know, even though baseball was going to pay for the hotel, man, gosh, the stuff's expensive down there. But I called the Alcor Life Extension Foundation to say, hey, can I come in for a tour? And all I'm interested in seeing Ted Williams. And, oh yeah, because, you know, they think I'm ready to drop $300,000 to get vitrified for 300 years. And so I had an appointment, you know, even though it's my only interest, but I was told, oh, and by the way, we have a hotel right next to us. It's very nice that the visitors to our place can get a special rate. So if you have people, those of you in Phoenix, or if you're going to be visiting Phoenix, you want a nice hotel at a reasonable price, call up the Alcor Life Extension Foundation for a tour, and then get yourself a nice room. But then the whole thing went to heck. They didn't do the pitch clock, and so that whole trip was canceled. So no, I did get to a Phoenix Giants game in 1972 at Municipal Stadium, and have been to a few of the Diamondback games, but never done spring training there.
You know, the light stanchions from the Polo Grounds are at Phoenix Beauty.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's somebody was asking about Normandale Community College in the Twin Cities.
I was.
Yeah. Okay. They have the foul. They had the foul poles from Met Stadium, and one of them is kind of significant to me because in 1977, when they had a sellout crowd, I got drunk, climbed the thing during the game. So I think one of the foul poles has been cut in half, and is at another ballpark in Bloomington. And I do public address announcing with the state amateur tournament, and the director said, if you want to go out there and climb it, go right ahead. So it was, and I got a bad leg right now. From when I was in the hospital 5 years ago, and I just I could barely make it up, and I just said, you know, this was a hell of a lot easier to climb when I was young, when I was healthy, and when I was drunk. So I'm glad that this.
The name of your book, please. Could you remind us of the name?
The latest, the anthology. That's, what is it called? The Polo Grounds Essays and Memories of New York City's Historic Ballpark. And then
how could somebody wants it who does not have it yet? How could they get it? Best way.
Amazon? You know, I suppose the Amazon's probably the easiest thing. And the first book, I'm trying to think if they're reprinting it. Temple University Press did that one. That's called Land of the Giants.
No, this is it.
You know, and I guess you just would have to check. Amazon's probably the best way. They might have used copies or new ones.
Anybody want to wrap this up? Final thoughts? Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, Stu, I just wanted to ask you, in your work on the Polo Grounds, what was the most interesting thing you discovered, or thing that you didn't know, and then when you did your work, you said, oh my goodness?
Oh, that's a good question. I should be ready for things like that. I think a lot of it was finding out the really early Polo Grounds. I was aware that they had at one time been down at Central Park in the 1880s, and figuring stuff out about that. But there were so many things, and especially when we got into the anthology, where I'm not just, you know, writing it myself, but getting contributions from people like John Pasteur. I keep talking about Dan's article on the shooting of Barney Doyle. That was as fascinating as it got. Ron Selter has something in there on it. So all of the, you know, so much of the information is new, that to me, all the time, to learn something new about it. And there's still kind of the mysteries. I mentioned the 1880s ballpark, when it had two tenants in 1883, and did the association team play on the West Diamond when the East Diamond was open? Or some people claim to know that with certainty. I'm a little more skeptical on everything. So there's still stuff to be found out. But, you know, I would trade it all for just one day of sitting in there and feeling the ballpark and the sounds and the smells, and roaming through the concourses and going up and down the ramps, and like what I did with Met Stadium, which I've got great memories of that. But to do it with a really classic stadium like the Polo, that's what I'd like to learn, firsthand experience there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, guys. I think we all owe Stu a round of applause. Great job, Stu.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough. And again, if anybody's interested in his 2 books, Stu said the best way to purchase them is through Amazon.
I guess that's yeah.
Amazon, you'll get them.
Yeah.
Have a drone deliver them. You know.
I recommend one book, The Giants and Yankees and the Battle for Supremacy in New York City. It talks about Arnold Rothstein and the owner of the Cotton Club and the way things were in the 1920s. It's an excellent read. And it's also when Babe Ruth first year in the Polo Grounds hitting 59 home runs. It's recommended reading.
All right, we hopefully will see many of you next Thursday. If you know anybody who wants to join us, please don't hesitate to have them email me. But again, Stu, you're the best, man. Thank you so much again. And if you didn't know, Stu spoke to the group in February, you know, at Finities. And again, can't thank you enough for coming back. And again, all these people were, many of them, different than you spoke to at that bar. So have a great night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Night, everybody. Stay safe.
Good night, guys.